أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إن نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين وضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب عليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي على أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة أن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم أرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وآية لهم أرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا شريك لهم ولهم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم انفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا نطعم من لا يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قول من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره نكسه في الحلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقناه لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب فلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلكم بلى وهو خلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم. الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من الشدة فاقته، وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته، وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم أعظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت، وكم من فادح من البلايا قلت، وكم من عثار وقيته، وكم من مكروه دفعته، وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم أعظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصدت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفي بعد أملي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي يا سيدي. فأسألك بعزتك التي لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحتمته أو أعلنت أو أخفيته أو أظهرت، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم. وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأنت وفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. قو على خدمتك جوارحي، واجدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب للجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إليك وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي، يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء، يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. If you would like to open your Qur'ans, there is only one central verse that we will be looking at. I have to stop myself, ammarata bisu', that is within me, that monster that is always fighting within me. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu doesn't have to restrain himself from doing evil to you and I, to doing dhulm to you and I. When we say Allah is Al-Qadir, all-powerful, what we mean to say is that Allah Jalla Jalaluhu is all-powerful and that all good emanates from Him in His creation. Amongst the good that comes is you and I. Amongst the good that comes is this system that Allah has created for the benefit of creation, such that they then can move forward in their existence and get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tonight, inshaAllah, you and I will move to the second part of our series, which will probably take us up until the nights of Muharram. And we will start looking at the three different universes or worlds, which are the stages of creation prior to our creation in this realm. We have what is known as Alam al-Anwar, the world of light. We have Alam al-Dhar, the world of particles. Alam al-Arwah, the world of the souls. All of these are stages before the creation in this stage of creation. And inshaAllah tonight we will start by looking at the first stage of Alam al-Anwar, the world of lights. And when the light of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, was created. When we take a step back and we think about the importance of this discussion or this part of the series, someone may ask, these are concepts which are unfathomable for us. We don't have knowledge of our own creation in the wombs of our mothers, nor in the first years of our life, let alone what came prior to this stage of existence. In fact, this is something that we recited the other day in Dua Arafah from Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, where he says, "You created me and I had no knowledge of my own creation." It's not like I was present when I was being created such that I could look at my own creation. Someone might ask, what is the benefit of talking about the stages of worlds prior to our experience in this world in which we have no memory of? These events that we cannot grab back to. The answer is the following. The first thing is that our existence in this world and our existence in the coming worlds are reflections of what occurred in the preceding worlds. For us to understand parts of our own existence here and our responsibilities and the reason as to why creation is created the way it is, we have to understand what happened prior to our existence here, because there is a reflective reasoning between what occurred in those worlds, what is happening here, and what will occur in the subsequent worlds. Number one. Number two, Islam's theology is the richest of theologies, and an evidence of that is our ability to access discussions like this that no other theology and no other mythology has access to. If you think about Greek mythology, which is arguably amongst the first of all mythologies to be written and exported around the world, we know that they have a lot of kind of floofy ideas, a lot of very kind of fluffy ideas around gods, and gods that fight and war with each other, and sometimes you have to appease them, and sometimes you have to appeal to them, and these sorts of ideas. Prior to this is the pre-Socratics, a group of scholars that came prior to Socrates. They spent much of their time trying to understand creation and the existence of creation. They were the first philosophers of this world, the pre-Socratics. And what they tried to do was look at creation and understand how creation was created. They understood the relationship between water and air and land and the rest of the universe, trying to understand the relationship between the stars and the earth. They were the first to move away from pure mythology into a philosophical, scientific understanding of this world. But prior to that, the pre-Socratics and Greek philosophy has nothing to offer about where we came from, how the universe started, and what occurred prior to that. So Islam here has an advantage over Greek philosophy. Christian theology, it starts at the point of what? Adam and Eve and the garden and the story of the rib and the story of the apple. Prior to that, there is nothing other than God created the world in 6 days and on the seventh He rested. There is nothing explaining anything prior to that, the stages of creation, the purposes of creation before that. So again, when it comes to the rich Islamic theology has an opportunity to explain creation in a way in which no other understanding is able to offer. This is important because if someone asks, what is the earliest point that we outside of Islam can actually point to creation? The answer is the Big Bang Theory, which is some 13.7 billion years ago. Great. Let us assume we accept the science of the Big Bang Theory. What happened before that? What made that first particle? What occurred before the creation of that first initial particle? This is what we are talking about. And there is no other school, there is no other philosophy, there is no other theology that can provide for this discussion of what occurs prior to the Big Bang Theory. And this is why Islam's rich theology is so important. That when we think about these things, we actually have something to offer the world, which no other school of thought is available to offer. So with that in mind, what I want to be able to do is to focus on one of the most popular narrations which comes to us from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, about the first creation. Now this hadith is very popularly narrated by both schools of thought. In fact, Sunni and Shia have the identical words, or at least almost identical words in their corpus of ahadith. Both narrations come from the greatest companion Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. So in the Sunnis, it comes from Jabir. In the Shia, it also comes from Hazrat Jabir alayhi as-salam. The difference is, in the Sunni school of thought, the chain goes up to someone called Abdul Razzaq, which is a debated individual that many Sunnis will reject. And so even though it is ascribed by many Sunni scholars, including great muhaddithin, theologians like Ibn Haythami, modern day Sunnis do wrangle with the veracity of this narration, and some actually reject it. In the Shi'i school of thought, this narration is found in Bihar al-Anwar, and many scholars, they accept it and they recount it. So for example, even Mufassirin like Allama Sayyid Tabatabai, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, Sayyid Tabatabai also quotes this narration in his tafsir when going through the stages of creation and the explanations of creation. The hadith, which we mentioned, comes from the Holy Prophet Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Jabir is narrated to have asked the Prophet the following: أخبرني عن أول شيء خلقه الله قبل الأشياء. Ya Rasulullah, inform me about the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created before creating anything else. Now what is important here at this point is you can see that yes, both schools of thought have narrated this. But look at the level of the thinking that was present in Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. Sometimes you have companions that are of different levels of thinking and appreciation. Jabir is asking a very important question about the cosmology, about the history of creation that it appears no other companion had thought about, which tells us that Jabir's thinking was of a certain level. أخبرني عن أول شيء خلقه الله قبل الأشياء. Inform me about the first thing that was created by Allah before all other things. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يا جابر إن الله تعالى خلق قبل الأشياء نور نبيك من نوره. The first thing that was created by Allah was the nur of your prophet from his nur, from the nur of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. This is the first creation, and why we begin to name this stage of creation the alam, the world of al-anwar, lights. And when we refer to lights here, we are talking about the nur of Allah, which he then creates as the nur of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. Let us mention, you see, there are actually a number of different narrations about this stage, but I'm just going to mention one because it's quite explicit and might be able to help us in our own spirituality, might be able to give us some indications about the stages of the growth that you and I can hope to have in our own life. The hadith continues. As I said, there's offshoots of this hadith and different ways that this narration is explained. One narration says the following. So the first light that was created was the light of your Prophet from his light, min nurihi, from the light of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. The hadith continues. And from this light, meaning from the light of the Prophet himself, Allah created from it, from the Prophet's nur, everything that is good. Everything that is good. And what this means is two things. Number one, when we say everything good, we mean everything. Whether it is a grain of salt, whether it is a drop in the ocean, whether it is some cosmic dust in the farthest of galaxies, all of this is created from the nur of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is number one. Number two, when we say everything good, what we mean here is that there is a sort of cascading in terms of creation. One scholar by the name of Sayyid Khalil Tabatabai explains it in this way. He gives us a philosophical explanation. He says, look, a poor person cannot enrich a rich person. The poor person, by definition, doesn't have much. So what can he give such that he financially enriches a rich person? Nothing. But the rich person, by virtue of what they have with them, can enrich the poor person. It has to be from top to bottom, from Ali ila Dani, from higher to lower. There has to be this kind of cascading of giving, not the other way. I cannot give anything to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I have nothing of nur to give. Whereas if the first creation and the greatest creation, Ashraf al-Makhluqat, is that of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then whatever else comes from him is taking from the nur of the Prophet himself. And so he is like that, giving rich down to someone like us who are poor and in need. He says this might be a more philosophical understanding of that famous ayah, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you but as a mercy to all the worlds. What does mercy mean here? It means everything came from the Prophet's nur. Everything in creation was created off the back of the nur of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. The hadith continues, and this is where it gets very interesting for our own spirituality and trying to think about how we can benefit from these stages of creation. So what happened next? Okay, we have the nur of the Prophet. The hadith continues and says, the nur of the Prophet stood before Allah until Allah decided otherwise. There's no time mentioned. There's no, at this point, we don't have time, right? It precedes time. Time is a construct of the physical creation of the universe. So when this hadith says that the Prophet stood, or the nur of the Prophet stood before Allah, we are talking about something that precedes time, and therefore the hadith cannot mention a period. It was just until Allah decided what happens next. And I think that might be an evidence of the soundness of the hadith, because someone who is weak in their understanding might try to put a period of time to it. They might try to falsify something. The fact that there is no time limit mentioned to it is an evidence that we realize that this is something giving us an indication of what is sound. Now, what occurs next? From here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from the light of the Prophet himself, and he created a station called Maqam al-Qurb, the station of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot really understand what this station is. All we can do is reflect on the meaning of the word Qurb, Maqam al-Qurb. What we mean to say here is possibly, again, I'm reliant on the commentary of the Ustad Khalid Tabatabai. He mentions that possibly Al-Qurb here means that the Prophet was given exposure to things which are so proximate to Allah. This is why the Prophet himself could not fathom sinning and could only ever be immaculate, because the things that he was made available to made him understand the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a way that there was never any idea in him to do anything other than be within the proximation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you reach that maqam, that first maqam, or like we would say, for example, in the Quran, when it comes to the Mi'raj, that you are closer, 2 bows or closer to Allah, whatever that means, whatever this station was, the Prophet experienced it as the first station of creation. Now again, this is not a physical creation. Maqam al-Qurb is something beyond the physical creation. From this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took 3 lights and created 3 things from the light of the Prophet, and created the Arsh, created the Kursi, and created the Malaika that uphold the Arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these were the second, the third, and the fourth creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Arsh and Kursi are 2 different things. Arsh is the throne of Allah. Kursi, seat. We don't know exactly what is the difference between these. And then there's the Malaika that are the upholders, the bearers of the Arsh of Allah. What is the Arsh? According to our scholars, it is the metaphor for the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah doesn't need an Arsh such that he actually sits on it. This of course would be shirk. What we mean is that this is the seat of authority, grand authority of this king, which is Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. From here, what happened next? From this light of the prophets, it had split into 3. It had created the Arsh, the Kursi, and the Malaika. From that same light, now we have another station that is created, another maqam. This is the second maqam. The maqam which is known as the maqam of hubb, the maqam of love. That from this point, the Prophet ﷺ was introduced to overwhelming love, which is why the way in which he reacted and interacted with even his harshest of enemies was through the perspective of love. Because all he was knowing from his beginning of creation was love, how to be able to treat human beings. From here, the station of love, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took 3 anwar, 3 lights, and created 3 things. First, al-qalam, the pen. The second, the lawh, the tablets which have all matters written on them. And then from there, the third, the Jannah itself, garden, was created from this light which came from the maqam of Hub. I mentioned to you, you could open your Qur'ans to chapter number 68, Surah Al-Qalam. There are many ayats that do indicate towards the topic of prior to creation, in the worlds prior to the creation, but I will go through them in accordance with when we reach them. So open your Qur'ans, chapter number 68, Surah Al-Qalam, and we'll read of these verses, inshaAllah. Everybody's there? Everybody's there?
Yeah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Noon wal qalami wama yasturun. I swear by the pen and what the angels write. Now, of course, a mutadabbir, someone who is going to ponder and reflect on the Quran, will not just read this and move on. They will say, which pen is being spoken of here? Is it a big pen? Which pen is being spoken of? Is it Mont Blanc? Which pen is being spoken about here? The pen that's being spoken about here, according to the narrations, is a pen which Allah created. And this pen was told, write. The pen responded, Ya Allah, what should I write? Allah responded, write everything. Everything. From beginning to end that is going to occur. My knowledge of what is going to occur with every creation. As the Quran says, not a leaf falls. Not a drop of wetness falls. وَلَا رَتْبٍ وَلَا يَابِسٍ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ. There is not even a droplet of water that falls. Nothing wet, nothing dry. But that it's already written with the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was written in al-lawh. You're holding this Quran right now has been pre-written in Allah's knowledge. وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ. I swear by the pen and what the malaika write. مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ. By the grace of your Lord, O Rasulullah, you are not mad. The things you've been exposed to, it's not madness. You are the first creation. You witnessed the pen writing all of what creation is going to do. وَإِنَّ لَكَ لَأَجْرًا غَيْرَ مَمْنُونَ. And most surely you shall have a reward that is never cut off. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. And most surely you are on the sublime morality. Your creation is the perfect, utmost sublime creation. Why? The Prophet's first station of existence was at Maqam. Which was the first station? Maqabal Qurb. And after that, Maqam Hub. From this station of love, there were 3 more nur, anwar, that were taken. 3 more lights. And the first, or the next station, the third station that Allah created was the maqam of khawf. The station of fearing Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. And again, the Prophet stood there for a period of time and basked in what it meant to have khawf, to have all of this awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From here, 3 lights were created. Allah created the rest of the malaika. Allah created the sun and the moon. Now, whether it means our sun and our moon, or whether it means the stages of creation that were allowing our world to exist, this is obviously something we cannot truly know, but it appears to be that our stages of creation were created. When I say our stages, I mean our physical world was now being created. The malaika, and of course the malaika, as you know, have roles for the physical universe. They bring the winds, they bring the rains, they organize or they implement the affairs of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu on earth. This is why that station of khawf came with it, the physical sun and the physical moon. From there, the next station, maqam al-raja, hope. The station of hope was created. As you know, fear and hope always go together. When we are running between, for example, Safa and Marwa, what are we doing? between the stations of fear and hope. So from here, 5 things were created. 5 anwar were created. The light of aql, the light of ilm, the light of hilm, which is forbearance, the light of iman, and the light of tawfiq were created. Where this stage, all of these things that the human being could possibly need for their success was created. From here, the last station that was created is called the maqam of haya, the station of modesty, the way in which people should positively interact with one another was created. And from here, what occurred next according to this hadith is that Ainul Hayba, which I can loosely translate as being Allah's inspiring eye, this awesome, I don't know how to translate the word Hayba, magnificent presence of Allah's eye, it doesn't mean literally physically eye, began, according to the narration, to create drops to cry. Now it doesn't mean literally cry, it means water drops were created from this, whatever Ain al-Hayba was. Preceding from this was 124,000 droplets, which were of course the 124,000 Anbiya and Mursaleen. And from each of these Anbiya and Mursaleen, from this came breath. And from these breaths of these 124,000 Anbiya and Mursaleen came their followers, their awliya, the shuhada, the salihin, the siddiqeen, from every one of these prophets. So those who are going to become the followers, the awliya, the shuhada of every prophet in accordance with their own time, that breath that they gave out created the light, created the existence of those people that were going to follow them. Which means that all of us here are created in that order of creation, and as a reflection here from the light of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. I don't think we have time to go into the next step of narrations because it will take time. The Anwar of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, which we'll have to do next week, because this is a whole series of conversations in itself. And after that, of course, comes the purposes of creation and our commitments and the various mithaq that were created with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we will leave that for next week. The point actually of this hadith is important, because not only does it give us an enriching theology, it tells us the stations that the Prophet himself sallallahu alaihi wa alihi was exposed to with Allah in order for the Prophet to be the Prophet, in order for him to be this magnanimous creature. He had to go through qurb with Allah, hub with Allah, khawf with Allah, raja with Allah, haya with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which tells us 5 maqamat that you and I can also reflect on for us to then also experience what we can within those realms. To then have access to those realms, be it here or inshaAllah going forward. It also makes us reflect on our relationship with those prophets. If we were from one community and we had been created from the breath of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam being of his companions, or Musa alayhi salam and his companions, what would it mean? What does it mean then that we were created from the breath as a reflection from the breath of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi? Actually, what we find in some narrations, and I'll bring these later on, but I want to give you an ishara for you to think about, that if all of this is cascading, that it comes from what is high to what is low, Think about this. If you and I are reflections of the breath of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as his followers, as his witnesses, as those who uphold his truth, where does that place the anwar of the Shia of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam? You see, if we were reflections of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, it would be wonderful. Who would not want to be that? But in the stages of creation, we are not reflected off from the breath of Musa alayhi salam. We are from the breath of the ultimate nur. That is of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which has certain implications on it. According to some riwayat, it has implications of what occurred within Alim al-Dar, which we will come to. And it also has certain implications on us in this world. And that is that the law that we follow is a reflection of the highest prophetic law. That we are expected to not uphold any ordinary law or a law of a prophet that came before. The same level of expectations and practices that were placed upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you and I are also expected to uphold as well. You say, obviously, but think about that. The greatest worshipper of Allah, you and I are expected to act the same as him. He fasted sunrise to sunset. We're expected to fast the same. Not given any easier for us, is it? He prays 5 times a day. We are expected to pray 5 times a day. He went on Hajj. We don't have an easier law. It's not something for the Prophet that's here and then we're here. Whatever the Prophet was expected to do, you and I are also expected to uphold. Someone will say, how is it possible for us mere ordinary individuals to uphold prophetic levels of worship? We were breathed from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is why we have that divine connection to him, which is why we have the potential to be able to follow him. We will, inshallah, continue to expand on these discussions in the coming weeks, but I hope this gives you an understanding of, according to our narrations, our aqa'id, what occurred first in the stages of creation. If everything was created from the nur of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you can imagine then how everything in existence is at his service. How everything wants to be in accordance with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can imagine then why we see those multiple narrations that tell us on the day of Ashura that when Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam was being slaughtered, that the entirety of creation responded in grief. Why is it that the earth shook? Why is it that underneath stones there was blood? Why is it that the skies wept blood? How is it that creation can respond to the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet, if it was not that they were but reflections of the light of the Prophet himself, the light of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam himself? You can imagine then that if those family members and companions saw what they saw and experienced what they experienced about creation, reacting, weeping in the way in which it did for Hussein salamullahi alayhi, can you imagine the extent of the grief that would have been going through the hearts of Sayyida Zainab and Sayyida Kulthum? One narration tells us that after the beheading of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Sayyida Zainab had to run back to the tents to look after the children. she begins to hear a sound outside from the Maidan. She turns towards her nephew As-Sajjad alayhi salam, who is lying in a state of such illness on the ground. She says, "O Sajjad, tell me, what is that sound that I'm hearing in the distance, that sound I can hear coming from the battlefield?" We are told that with a little bit of strength that Imam had, he lifted up the bottom of the tent and looked out in towards the Maidan, and he could only respond by saying, "That sound that you can hear is the sound of the horse's hooves trampling upon the chest of my father, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein." We are told that when they trampled upon his chest became so soft it was as if it had become kneaded like a breaded dough. This is what occurred to the chest of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. This is that very same chest that it says that Ruqayya used to be able to sleep on, that she could only fall asleep upon that chest. How now does she fall asleep? It will come a time when Sayyidah Ruqayya has to fall asleep upon the hardened rocks of the dungeons of Yazid inside Sham, where people are standing outside mocking her, laughing at her, calling for her to be lashed, calling for her to be stoned, calling for her to be sold off as a slave. This is how Sayyidah Ruqayya ended up having to sleep. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi Ajjalallahu ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif. We ask Allah to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we get to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war, oppression, poverty, homelessness, disease and disaster. Grant them more safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to understand the purposes of our creation such that it guides us in our life for us to be able to achieve the fullness of our potential. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to be able to witness the day of Ashura so that we may again shed a tear for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on his day. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salli ya Rabbi ala khiratika min khalqik Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. I think we have 5 minutes till Salat al-Maghrib. If there are any questions, I will try to take them. If the questions are beyond my scope, I will tell you I can't answer, or that we will be talking about this in a subsequent discussion, inshallah.
Sheikh, when you mentioned that everything was created from the nur of the Prophet.
Yes.
So, how would it then be conceivable for people like Yazid, or people like Pharaoh, or people like those in history that we Namrud? Which nur did they come from?
This is a good question. We will come, I think, a little bit more to this next week. So we hope that we can speak about this again. But what we understand is that all of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam were presented to the whole of creation. When I say creation here, I mean humanity, right? And we were asked to give our allegiance to them, our bay'ah to them. And some...
This is the covenant that will be...
Yes, which we'll come to. And some accepted and some rejected.
Yeah.
Now, what that tells us is that although they were nur, freedom of will and freedom, I mean, you could call it freedom of thought, but let's call it freedom of will, was gifted to people at that point. It indicates that something within those individuals at that point, for them to reject, they were individuals that in the future, you can have it two ways, we'll talk about this. Is it that they were in this world going to be these darkened human beings that allowed dhulumat to overcome their nur, such that in that realm, that's how they acted? Or is it that in that realm, they proximated themselves towards dhulumat, which is why they rejected this covenant, which is why in this world they could not be but reflections of what they were in that world?
Is that the reason why in the previous discussions we've had, when we Israel, we've hardened their hearts, or in Surah Yasin, we've created a veil over there?
It's not Allah. They have decided to be that way. And Allah gives us free will here. And we understand the construct of free will within this realm, don't we? Right? So, if we know that Allah has given us free will, we then don't reject the notion of Allah giving us free will in that world. You and I are given a knife. With that same knife, you will cut bread and feed the homeless. I will stab someone with it. Allah does not make the decision here. In the same way, in that realm, just because we were created of light, the same way I'm created of matter here, the fact that I was created of light there doesn't mean that I wasn't given freedom of will. I still was. Which is why those individuals could choose to use their freedom in a way in which they did, which then reflected into their existences here. Some of these things are very hard for us to fathom, but I hope that gives us a glimpse of what's going to come, inshallah.
Hassan, maybe inshallah next week.
Barakallah bik.
We relate this with Surah An-Nur. Allah Nur Samawati wal Ard. If we can relate it to what's the difference.
We are coming to that next week, inshallah. The Mishkatin, this verse, we will come to it specifically next week, because the majority of ahadith talk about that that's Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. So we'll have to look at what is the zahir of that ayah, and then what is the batin. And the butun or the bawatin are, as you know, we'll come to that next week, inshallah. Hayakallah. Sisters, are there any comments, questions? Is that my friend from the other day? Is that my young friend from the other day? Where's your crisps? Khair, inshallah. Ahsantum, barakallah bik. We conclude with salawat, inshallah, in honor of our Holy Prophet Muhammad. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
He'll do the other.
Sayyidina, would you recite Ziyarat Warith for us?